Okay, a couple things I forgot to mention when we were going through the impulse coupling on this American Bosch MJK 4/2 magneto. You see those 4 flathead machine screws in there? I said do not remove them. The reason is because this plate has a slot in it that actually captures the weights. When the gravity pulls them down in, it has to be in a certain position, because some of these magnetos, like on a D8, D7, they'll run like this. This is the top, this is the bottom. But on a D6, and I probably assume the D5, the one with those little flat opposed engines, these things are mounted basically about 80 degrees upside down. So if that slot gets put back together here for some reason, because you weren't keeping track of it, it's never going to work, because there's several different configurations of this magneto. So just leave well enough alone. Don't mess with those. Now, the first thing we got to do is we got to take the cap off. And there is a cautionary note on removing the cap. There are 3 very, very delicate carbon brushes inside. And if this cap is pulled off crooked or put on crooked, it is very easy to break one of those very delicate carbon brushes. And they cost $8 a piece. So you don't want to do that. So you take a couple of long number 10, 24 machine screws, and you cut the tops off of them, and you cut a little groove in there for a screwdriver, and you screw them in as guide studs. Then when you pull this off, it's going to come off straight, and it is not going to have any chance to break one of those very delicate brushes. So take 2 of these screws out, put 2 guide studs in, and then you worry the cap off over the guide studs, and you will see these very expensive, delicate carbon brushes don't get broken. You see them in there, the 3 brushes? Now they're on springs, and they're just telescoped down into those sockets. So if you do end up with a broken one, all you got to do is pull. Pull hard, it'll come out along with the spring. Putting a new one in, it's kind of a delicate little deal to get that fat into that spring started down in that hole, but once it starts, you can shove it right in. Next thing to come out is the rotor. Now, normally these things come out like this. However, they can, because they're made out of brass and they're setting into a steel socket, they can get really, really stuck in there. And they're also made of plastic. They cost about $50 for a new one. So the best way to get those things out of there is very carefully with true pry bars. Get underneath as far as you can so you're into the strongest part of the rotor, and very carefully just lever that sucker up out of there until it gets unstuck. And then you just, use a little emery cloth on that, Q-tip with some solvent on it down in there, and you got the rotor out of there without breaking it. Now the next thing we got to get out of there, we've got some really, really tiny screws involved here, and if you don't handle them very carefully, there's one of them under a lot of spring tension, it could go blowing completely across the shop and you never see it again. So what we do first is we remove this screw, and we disconnect this condenser from its little mount. And then we are going to take the breaker plate off, and that way we can actually handle the points up out of here where we can actually capture that screw when it comes out. So we get a little screwdriver here. We take this one out, which is, it hooks the breaker points up to the primary wire in the coil. And it also connects it to the shorting stud. Then we're going to take this little guy out here so we can get the condenser out. Now, one of the trickiest little deals that I got here, if I can find the fucker, is this. This is a little spring-loaded slot screw capturing tool. And you cock it, you put it down over the screw, push, and theoretically it captures that screw. Well, it did for a minute. Now, I don't want to lose that screw down into the bowels of this fucking thing. So I'll just bring it out with the condenser. Then I'll take a little magnet, pull it out of there. See that little guy there? Looks like about a number 8 with a lock washer. Now, next thing we do is we're going to take the breaker point assembly up out of there now. The reason it's almost impossible to attach these 2 wires to this breaker assembly when it's in place inside the distributor. Where's my little magnet? There's a helpful little fella. Be nice if I used the right end, wouldn't it? Okay, now, you see, we have the breaker assembly and the condenser and everything right out here in our hot little hands. Now, if all we're going to do is clean these points and put it back in, we could probably just leave it at that. Now, it's very, very difficult to get these points actually, perfectly perpendicular to each other. But if you're going to have to change this condenser, or you want to take these things the rest of the way apart, you got to take that little fucking screw out of there. And it's spring loaded. And this is where it gets exciting. Because if you don't hold on to that spring, it's going to go kazingo clear across the shop, and you will never see that screw again. I don't know why I'm shaking. Maybe I'm just a tired old guy, huh? Okay. I've got it out. Now see, I can release the tension on that spring, and you see there's the contact copper right there, and there's a spring. And you have to physically, by hand, hold all that shit together and put those 2 wires back on and put that tiny little screw in there. So it's kind of a delicate little operation. Now, this is a condenser. If I had a capacitance meter, I could test it, but I don't. I bought one on eBay, which is supposed to be good and all this honkus-bonkus stuff, and it didn't work at all. They sent my money back, but for a few bucks, I'll just buy a new one. And here's that other wire that goes from the point assembly to the coil and to the kill switch. block. Now the next thing that comes off is this base plate here that holds a wick, very similar to the wick that we had in the impulse coupling assembly. And we are going to clean it up, soak it with some 50 weight oil, 50 or 60 weight is what it calls for. And keep in mind when you're putting this back on, it's got the little machine screw, a lock washer, and a flat washer. And this thing just pulls right up out of here, and the wick is inside here. You can see that there. It's made out of felt. It gets soaked with oil. Now, the next thing we got to pull off is this small drive gear here. Now, it is not on a taper, but it does have a key. And it's got a little 1/2 inch. Gee whiz, where'd that sucker go? Now, before I take this out, I will demonstrate that these two gears are timed as they are assembled. There is one red tooth on this drive gear, and there is a C on the driven gear. You see that? Can you see those? They have to be lined up. So before you pull this little gear off, make sure that you can see the mark, and you can see the mark on the driven gear so that you know how to put them back together. Because if those marks are gone or wiped out or painted over or something like that, and you can't tell exactly where you're supposed to be, well, you're up the creek, aren't you? So this little guy comes right off, and you can see the mark. There's also a slot there that's marked red. Now, next thing out of the box, we take the back off, and that's reasonably easy. There are 6 machine screws holding this back on. Now, I did get that keyway out of that shaft, so this thing should come right off over the end of that shaft without damaging the seal. There it goes. See? See how mungy it is in there? We're going to clean all that shit up. Now the next thing that comes out is the magnet rotor. Now this thing, I'm warning you, it has an extremely powerful magnet in it. And if you lay it down near some hacksaw chips or some metal filings or something like that, it is going to absorb them and grow, and you're going to have a horrible time getting that shit off of there. Now, see, there's a very powerful magnet. It was very difficult to pull out of there. We're going to clean up these ball bearings, and we're going to lubricate them. And set this right here. Now, the next thing that comes out is this gear. Now, the thing that holds the gear in is a very teeny, tiny, itty bitty ring. It's about 1/4 inch in diameter, maybe 5/16. Say it's about 20 thousandths thick. Where's my micrometer? Fucking thing at? I got about 7 of them around here, and I can't see one. Well, anyway, this little bugger, if you lose it, you got a problem. And it will go pew right out of your fucking sight, and you'll never see it again. There's also a little thrust washer behind it, and it goes right there on the end of that shaft. Now, it was already off of there when I took the magneto apart. And so I don't quite know how it got off of there. Of course, this thing's held in place with those brushes and with the distributor rotor, and the brushes kind of hold it in position. So that thing missing isn't going to stop the thing from operating. But I found it down in the bowels hooked onto that magnet when I took it apart. So next thing out of there is the coil, right there. Now, there's 2 little slot-headed bolts here. Why they use these type, I have no idea. But if they're really, really stuck, you can have a problem if you bugger off the end of them. Because then you're going to have to get some precision way to drill them out and pull them out with an easy out, and believe me, you don't want to do that. So if you can't get them loose with a very perfectly fitted screwdriver and maybe a very, very perfectly fitted crescent wrench, don't mess around with them until you bugger them up. Get an impact screwdriver. Put that in there. Make sure it's the correct fit. Make sure it's on a solid surface, and give it a wham. And that should take those things loose. Now, when you put these back in, if you do take them out all the way, the specifications call for lubricating them with white lead. Do not use aluminum-based never-sees, because never-sees, aluminum base, relies on the fact that between 2 ferrous metal fittings, like a cast iron block and a steel bolt, that you have a dissimilar metal in between them. Well, this is an aluminum housing. And if you use aluminum-based never-sees and put this thing together, there's a good chance you're never going to get it apart again, because of the fact that the aluminum in the metal, in the anti-sees, can basically stick itself to the aluminum in this housing over time. The foil just comes out like that. All there is to it. Now, we've got this thing far enough apart that we can clean it up now. And so we're going to do that. We're going to clean it up. We're going to re-lubricate the bearings. We're going to carefully put it back together. And when we put this thing in with its thrust washer and this little teeny snap ring deal, we're going to hope we don't lose that sucker like the last guy apparently did. Because like I say, I found it in the hook to the magnet. When I pulled the magnet out of there, it was not in the place where it was supposed to be. So I'm going to tie it off now, And I'm going to go ahead and see if I can't post this fucking thing. And I'll clean this up while it's posting, and we'll try to do the reassembly, get that done.